Hello and welcome to today's public program, A Sanctuary in the Storm, Carl Lutz and the Rescue of Budapest Jews, co-presented with the Carl Lutz Society. I'm Gabriel Sanders, public programs producer at the Museum of Jewish Heritage, a living memorial to the Holocaust. Now in its 25th year, the museum is committed to the crucial mission of educating our diverse community about Jewish life and heritage before, during, and after the Holocaust. As part of that mission, our programs illuminate the stories of survivors, broader histories of hate and anti-Semitism, stories of resistance against injustice, and more. Thank you for joining us today virtually. We hope you will visit the museum in person to see our core exhibition, The Holocaust, What Hate Can Do, alongside our temporary exhibition, Survivors, Faces of Life After the Holocaust, photographs by Martin Scholler. We will be opening an exhibit on the Danish rescue, which will be opening in fall of 2023. Learn more and find tickets on our website. We appreciate the vital support of our members here at the museum. If you want to get closer to the museum and enjoy exclusive programs, member previews to exhibitions, and free admission, you can explore museum membership on our website or email membership@mjhnyc.org to learn more. Closed captions are available on today's program. Instructions on how to turn captions on or off will be posted in the chat, in addition to the links I mentioned. If you have questions for our speakers, please post them in the Zoom Q&A box, and we will get to as many as we can at the end of the hour. Though I will be off camera during the program, I'll be here in the chat for any thoughts, questions, or needs. Budapest, 1944. Vice Consul Carl Lutz and the Swiss Legation of Budapest started the largest diplomatic operation to rescue Jews during World War II. Thanks to an ingenious system of safe conduct papers and residential buildings put under consular protection, Carl Lutz, who had acted as a protective power representing interests of the US and UK and Hungary, sheltered and saved tens of thousands of Jews. Frederic Hayat, Vice President of the Switzerland-based Carl Lutz Society, will deliver a presentation about Lutz and will be joined by Agnès Hirschi, Lutz's stepdaughter, and Charles Gati, a survivor saved by Lutz's efforts. Pascale Baeriswyl, Ambassador of Switzerland to the United Nations, will be delivering an introductory speech, and Yehuda, George, and Robert Lindenblatt, survivors saved by Lutz's efforts, will also deliver remarks. The Carl Lutz Society is a Swiss historical society recognized as partner by leading historical institutions, Holocaust institutions, including the State Museum of Auschwitz in Poland. The society has served in the support group to the delegation of Switzerland and to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. Recently, the society organized an exhibition in Geneva, extended during the Geneva summit between President Biden and Putin in 2021, and in Budapest, next to the Shoes Memorial along the Danube in the fall of 2022. Frederic Hayat is the Vice President of the Switzerland-based Carl Lutz Society. He has lectured at several conferences on Carl Lutz in Europe and North America, notably at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C., where Carl Lutz graduated in 1924. Agnès Hirschi was born in London shortly before World War II broke out. She spent her early youth in Budapest. Although she was only a little girl of 6 during the last and worst time of the war in the Hungarian capital, she remembers the wartime vividly. She spent the last 2 months of the war with the Lutz family in the bomb shelter of the British legation in Buda. Since 1949, Hirschi has lived in Switzerland. She studied languages and journalism in Bern, and she has worked as a journalist for a daily newspaper and served as a lay judge. She has many personal memories of Carl Lutz, who married her mother, Magda, in 1949 and raised her as a daughter. Her activity in connection with her stepfather has included keeping Lutz's memory alive, organizing exhibitions, and giving lectures, all important parts of her life. Saved by Carl Lutz, Charles Gati served as senior advisor with the policy planning staff of the U.S. Department of State. He taught at Union College, Columbia University, and has served for 3 decades as professor of European and Eurasian Studies at the School of Advanced International Studies at Johns Hopkins University. He is presently a fellow at the SAIS Foreign Policy Institute. Thank you again for joining us today, and I will now introduce Ambassador Pascale Baeriswyl, who will deliver introductory remarks.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends following this online event, my name is Pascale Baeriswyl. I am the ambassador representing Switzerland to the United Nations in New York. I feel very honored to speak to you today. Many thanks to the Museum of Jewish Heritage and to the Carl Lutz Society for the invitation, and to the speakers who will recount the life and work of Carl Lutz. While somehow a normal public servant, Carl Lutz became a true Swiss hero. He saved tens of thousands of lives, risking his own in a place and time of great danger, defying the most barbaric regime, the Nazis and their Hungarian followers. He is, together with his wife and his team, who helped him, responsible for one of the, if not the biggest civilian rescue operation during the Second World War. In 1964, Carl Lutz was the first Swiss citizen to be recognized as righteous among the nations. For me, as a public servant and Swiss diplomat like him, the example of Carl Lutz resonates with me in a special way. This is because he channeled his heroism through his professional activity. To save the Budapest Jews from deportation and death, he established letters of protection by the thousand. He issued collective passports. He placed dozens of buildings under diplomatic protection to accommodate refugees. To achieve his work of humanity, Carl Lutz used the skills and tools of diplomacy. A bureaucrat rescuer against the evil bureaucracy of the final solution. Today, through his extraordinary behavior, Carl Lutz leads us to think about the moral and ethical responsibility we have as diplomats, and which may go beyond our daily duty. This is why, in my previous function as Vice Minister of the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, I introduced the movie Carl Lutz, the Hidden Hero, directed by Daniel von Arburg, into the curriculum of our diplomatic trainees in order to discuss with our next generation the ethics of our profession. To one of these discussions, which I chaired 5 times, I invited his stepdaughter, which was a very touching experience and exchange for our trainees as much as for myself. World War II and the Holocaust belong to the previous century, but our world is still plagued with conflicts and attacks against humanity. Diplomats often have to face daily such questions. How shall we react in face of injustice, violence, atrocities? Shall we always follow strict guidelines and instructions? Is there room for ingenious solutions, pushing the limits of what is possible? The extraordinary courage, creativity, and effectiveness of Carl Lutz are today an example that we should, as diplomats, but also simply as human beings in 2023, keep in mind and in our hearts. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, I will now hand it off to Frederic Hayat.
Good evening. I would like to welcome all of you, especially Ambassador Pascale Baeriswyl. We just heard Agnès Hirschi, the stepdaughter of Carl Lutz, Charles Gati, and the 3 brothers of the Lindenblatt family, all rescued by Carl Lutz. I would like to express my sincere thanks to the Museum of Jewish Heritage for having organized this event. Few people know that when Europe was in a state of turmoil under the weight of Nazi barbarism, Switzerland has been seen as a safe haven. In fact, the possession of a single sheet of paper with a Swiss flag at the upper left and the Carl Lutz signature at the bottom left could make the difference between life and a certain death. I will try tonight to explain to you how a single man a single man with his team managed to stop the death machine of the Nazi regime. The Swiss Legation of Budapest, along with other neutral countries, organized the largest rescue operation during the Second World War, rescuing more than half of the Jewish population of Budapest. At a time where other diplomats looked away, Carl Lutz excised the word indifference from his vocabulary. Carl Lutz was born on 30th of March 1895 from a small village east of Switzerland, Walzenhausen, and his family was Methodist and deeply religious. At the age of 18, he realized that his future won't be in Switzerland, and he decided to emigrate to the United States without any money and barely speaking English. He studied at the College of Warrington to become a pastor, but he realized very soon that he was not set up to be a pastor. Looking for a job during the summer, an opportunity occurred at the Swiss Legation of Washington, where he was noticed by the ambassador himself, Mark Peter, who encouraged him to study diplomacy to the George Washington University. He graduated in 1924, and he will say for the next 15 years, he will work from one consulate to another one, and he will meet as well his wife, German Swiss like him, Gertrude Frankhausen. In 1934, Carl Lutz wanted to come back to Europe and asked to be transferred in London. But his foreign minister has a much more important task for him. And Carl Lutz was appointed to the Jaffa consulate, where the economy was flourishing. At that time, Palestine was administered by the United Kingdom. So on January 21st, 1935, Carl Lutz and his wife settled in Jaffa. In Palestine, 4 events will occur that will certainly explain the future behavior when Carl Lutz will be posted in Budapest. The first event, I'm sure most of you have heard about the J stamp fixed on Austrian and German Jewish passport. Indeed, in 1938, under the pressure of Adolf Eichmann, Jews had to flee Austria. A large proportion of them tried to come to Switzerland. Switzerland asked Germany how they could identify those Jewish people who wanted to come to Switzerland. Germany proposed to fix a J stamp on their passport, which was sadly accepted by Switzerland. Carl Lutz was one of the only diplomats who took his pen to write to his seniors to protest against such an inhuman measure. Indeed, other countries who saw the arrival of Jews, like France or Belgium, never took such a measure. Secondly, when they arrived in Palestine, Carl Lutz and his wife saw the arrival of Jews fleeing the racial laws in Europe. Thanks to the presence of the Jewish agency in Palestine and in Europe, Jews became dominant in commercial trade. They became wealthy and they started to buy a lot of land, often from Arab people. Those Arab people felt threatened in what they consider as their home and started to rebel against the arrival of Jews, killing some of them. And one day, Carl Lutz and his wife, when they were at their balcony, saw a Jew being hanged. They couldn't intervene in any way, and this action had a profound impact on both of them. And one can say that this incident is the turning incident that will lead the future actions of Carl Lutz, but definitely mark the start of his profound sympathy to the Jewish people. The third event occurred when the British tried to put at the same table of negotiation Jews and Arab in order to create a government to administrate Palestine. In front of the refusal of Arab people to be seated at the same table than Jews, the British decided to edit the white papers, and one of these clauses, which is very important for this presentation, is that not more than 75,000 Jews will be allowed to emigrate from Europe to Palestine. And this is very important because when he will be posted in Budapest, Carl Lutz will be in charge of the administration of this quota of 75,000. Last event occurred when the war broke out. Germany asked Switzerland to represent its interest in Palestine. Carl Lutz was in charge, and he put a Swiss flag at the top of the German embassy, and he negotiated with the British that all the German diplomats were able to return to Germany with their family and with all their belongings. And Germany will remain always grateful to Carl Lutz and Switzerland for having defended so well their interests. And this point will be very important for the presentation. So in 1940, Carl Lutz came back to Bern, but he won't stay very long, because in April 1941, Hungary and Germany invaded Yugoslavia, who asked Switzerland to represent their interest in Berlin. And Carl Lutz went to Berlin, he stayed several months, and he met a lot of Nazi dignitaries, including the foreign minister, Joachim from Ribbentrop. Then, the 7th of December 1941, the Pearl Harbor attack forced the United States to declare war to Japan. A couple of days later, Hungary, Italy, and Germany declared war to the United States. One day later, the United Kingdom entered the arena. Within a few days, 43 countries, accounting for 70% of the planet, asked Switzerland to represent their interests. And during Christmas 1941, Carl Lutz is summoned by the head of the Foreign Interest Department to lead this service in Budapest. Carl Lutz will represent 12 to 14 countries, including the United States and the United Kingdom. Carl Lutz must have been a very talented diplomat to be entrusted with such a special mission. And at the same moment, he was appointed vice consul. So Carl Lutz arrived in Budapest on the 2nd of January 1942. And at that time, Hungary did not apply the German Nazi racial law because Hungary was concerned with its image abroad. But between the two wars, Hungary was already applying its own racial laws, and one clause which is known as the law number 25, so-called the numerus clausus, fixed the number of Jewish students attending Hungarian university not to exceed 5%. So when he arrived, he found a situation which was calm. And since Carl Lutz was fond of photography, he took a lot of pictures of Budapest. Budapest is divided in two parts by the river Danube. On the right-hand side, you have Pest, and on the left-hand side, you have Buda. When he arrived, he put his office, Carl Lutz put his office in the former American legation in Pest, and he took residence in Buda, in the hill of Buda, in the former British legation. And from his balcony, he had a beautiful view on the Danube and on Pest, and this image will come back at a later stage. Carl Lutz in Budapest had only one superior, who was Maximilian Jäger, the Swiss ambassador, who helped Carl Lutz a lot in his rescue mission. But the Swiss ambassador represented the interest of one country, while Carl Lutz was representing 12 to 14 countries. He had 150 people working for him. And within a few weeks, Carl Lutz became one of the highest profile person in Budapest, and he became a key person in everything in relation with interest allies. As you will remember, Carl Lutz was in charge of administrating the white papers and the quota of 75,000. This is why on March 27, 1942, he received from the Foreign Office in London a list of 270 orphans, Jews, who were allowed to emigrate to Palestine and who received an immigration certificate. At this moment, Carl Lutz met key people from the Jewish community in Budapest. Miklos Kraus, who was in charge of the Palestine office in Budapest, Otto Komeli, who was the president of the Jewish Agency for Palestine, who was to be murdered January 1st, 1945, and its vice president, Retzo Katzner. He met as well the chiefs of the Zionist youth organization, the Halutzim, who were a close-knit group of very courageous men and women who gave a lot of support to Carl Lutz during the tragic event. As an astute diplomat, Carl Lutz, and when he saw the uprising of the anti-Semitism in Hungary, took his first rescuer decision. He gave diplomatic protection and Swiss identity papers, not only to these three guys, but to the 150 Halutzim working for him. And he renamed their office Immigration Department of the Swiss Legation. He put some diplomatic plates. And later on, he moved the whole office in the basement of the American legation. This shows you how much power Carl Lutz had at this time. And it shows as well the strong trust he built with the Halutzim. So between 1942 and 19th of March, 1944, Carl Lutz was able to send 10,000 Jews to Palestine. But on 19th of March, 1942, everything changed when Germany invaded Hungary, because Hitler was afraid that Regent Horthy joined the Allies, as Italy just did. So now Carl Lutz will face the German and not the Hungarian. So this time, the racial laws were raging. Yellow star houses, closure of the border, random arrest, seizure of properties. Overnight, the Jews became not only poor, but they became beggars. At this very moment, Carl Lutz has in his hands a list of 8,000 people allowed to emigrate to Palestine. And this is a key point in this presentation, because the truth is that none of these 8,000 people will be able to quit and to leave Hungary, but Carl Lutz used this number to leverage his negotiation with the Hungarian and the Nazis in order to rescue half of the Jewish population of Budapest. So, seeing the danger coming, Carl Lutz started to issue a Schutzpass to citizens for whom Switzerland was representing their country. So, for example, here we have US citizens, and Carl Lutz issued their Schutzpass with the mention that those people are under Swiss protection while they are in Hungary. At the same time, Carl Lutz met the German most senior minister, Edmund Fessenmayer, who was indeed running Hungary. Fessenmayer welcomed Lutz with the congratulation from Joachim from Ribbentrop, who thanked Carl Lutz for having defended so well their interests in Germany and in Palestine, sorry. And Ribbentrop sent a message to Carl Lutz saying that you are very well appreciated by the German government. And when Carl Lutz asked about his list of 8,000 people, Fessenmayer told him that he will ask to Ribbentrop, but he suggested to Carl Lutz to visit the German guy in charge of the transportation in Budapest, Adolf Eichmann. Carl Lutz never heard about Adolf Eichmann, but within a few minutes, thanks to the Halutzim and the Jewish agency, he realized at once what kind of person Adolf Eichmann was. He came to Budapest with 150 persons only, and we all know the atrocities he perpetrated in Hungary. He put his headquarters at the top of the Buda hill in the Hotel Majestic. And when he left Adolf Eichmann asked him, "Why don't you hand me this list of people with their name and address so I can prepare them to their transport for Palestine?" So instinctively, Carl Lutz refused. And when he went out, he at once sends a telegram to his own foreign minister, Marcel Pilegola, to send a telex to Ribbentrop to authorize the immigration of the Jews. And Marcel Pilegola not only refused to send this telegram, but told Carl Lutz that he was doing too much for the Jews, and rescuing Jews was not his business, because Marcel Pilegola considered that the Jews were not political refugees, and to that extent, they didn't merit any assistance. So Carl Lutz realized that he will be alone to face the devil. And here starts the story of the Schutzpass, because in order to protect those 8,000 people from deportation, Carl Lutz decided to edit a letter of protection stipulating that the holder has been authorized to emigrate to Palestine and is holding a certificate of emigration. And in the meantime, the holder is under the protection of Switzerland, preventing the holder to be called for forced labor and eventually deportation. As you can imagine, Carl Lutz authorized the Halutzim to edit more than 8,000 letters, but always in respecting the numeration of between 1 and 8,000. As you can imagine, several series of 8,000 letters started to circulate in Budapest. One day of April 1944, a beautiful woman with her daughter came to the American legation and asked to meet Carl Lutz. The Maria Gross explained Carl Lutz that her daughter was born in the UK, and as a US citizen, she was calling for the protection of Switzerland. Carl Lutz looked at the two women and said to himself, "For them, I will do more." He offered a job to Maria Gross in his residency and hosted both of the women inside the British legation until the end of the war. And he issued a Schutzpass, a UK Schutzpass to the girl. Carl Lutz and Maria Gross fell in love. Carl Lutz will divorce his wife at the end of the war and will marry Maria Gross. And I'm sure you have all guessed that her daughter, who will become the stepdaughter of Carl Lutz, is Agnès Hirschi, who is with us tonight and will testify just after this presentation. At this stage of the presentation, and at a time in our world where whistleblowers are very important, I must tell you about the Auschwitz Protocol episode. What was the Auschwitz Protocol? It was a document written by two people who escaped from Auschwitz and who described all the mechanism of the death machine of Auschwitz, but who also described the future deportation of the whole Jewish population of Hungary. Carl Lutz had already received this document, and he has sent it to his minister, the foreign minister, Marcel Pilegola, who just decided that it was not his business. But Marcel Pilegola was not the only one acting with such a behavior. Even Roosevelt thought that he needed to win the war before rescuing the Jews. And what could the Jews do? To organize an uprising, like in Warsaw, with the disastrous consequences? This was terrible, because at this exact moment, every single day, 3 trains carrying 12,000 people were heading to Auschwitz, where upon arrival, all of the people were herded to the gas chamber. So Carl Lutz asked a Roman diplomat who was going back from Budapest to Switzerland to give a copy of this document to the honorary consul of Salvador, George Montello, who was in Geneva and who was working with the consul himself, Jose Castellanos, because Carl Lutz knew that those two were helping Jews by issuing Schutzpass and the Schutzbrief to the Jews, and they were helping the resistance. So Carl Lutz thought that maybe Montello can use this document to a better effect. And Carl Lutz was right, because upon receiving the document, Montello organized a massive press campaign in Switzerland, and not less than 380 articles were published, despite this very strict censure. Indeed, in Switzerland, it was strictly forbidden to criticize the Nazi regime. And very rare in Switzerland, a protest was organized in front of the cathedral in Basel. Montello sent as well the document to the UK and to the United States. And once again, the same day, the 23rd of June, a massive protest was organized in front of the Madison Square Garden in New York. And so Roosevelt, who was running for a fourth mandate and needed the Jewish vote, decided to react. And on June 26, 1944, Carl Lutz and the Swiss ambassador handed a letter to Regent Horthy, saying that the Allies will help all the Hungarian dignitaries responsible for the deportation of Jews. And on the 8th of July, Regent Horthy ordered the stop of the deportation. Unfortunately, at this stage, 440 Jews has already taken the fateful train. So Carl Lutz went back to see Adolf Eichmann, because 250,000 Jews were remaining in Budapest. So he saw Adolf Eichmann, who asked him, "Herr Consul, what are you spending so much energy to rescue Jews?" And Carl Lutz answered, "Herr Obersturmbannführer, if you were a Jew, you would come to me for protection. How do you dare?" shouted Eichmann. Then he looked at Lutz and said, "I have good news for you. Himmler asked the Führer for the authorization for your 8,000 Jews. And Hitler said, if this request comes from the person who defended our interest in Palestine, I exceptionally grant the authorization. So here's the deal. We let these 8,000 people go, but from now on, your letter of protection will not be honored in the whole Hungary." So this meant that the deportation would start again. So Carl Lutz stood up, left Adolf Eichmann in silence, which means in diplomatic language, a complete breakdown of communication. At this time, Carl Lutz realized that the quota of 75,000 has not been reached yet. There was an unreached quota of 40,000. So Carl Lutz tried to explain to the British and to the Hungarian authorities that the 8,000 in the list was not for individuals, but for families. So the 40,000 quota can be reached. But the British not only refused this trick, but they decreased the quota from 8,000 to 5,000. So from this exact date, Carl Lutz was determined to use all his power and all his diplomatic talents into a single objective, to service his conscience. And Carl Lutz took three vital decisions. The first one is that he realized that having the whole Halutzim working from the basement of the American legation was very dangerous. So he looked for a new building, a very modern building, just next to the American location, called the Glass House. And in July, the 27th of July 1944, the Glass House was renamed the Immigration Department of the Foreign Interest of the Swiss Legation. He put diplomatic place. And the first day of the opening, Carl Lutz took some pictures of the crowd waiting for letters of protection in front of the Glass House. The second decision, Carl Lutz realized that the Jews were not safe in the Yellow Star House. So he went to see the foreign minister of Hungary, who told him that everybody knows in Budapest that he has exceeded the the quota he was entitled to with the 8,000 people. And Carl Lutz just replied, "This is true, and I'm here to ask you to put the whole Jewish population under Swiss protection." After very skillful negotiation, Carl Lutz managed to transfer 17,000 Jews into 76 safe houses in a street along the Danube. Here you can see them. It's the Podzony Street. And he put diplomatic plate in front of each building. This is the largest utilization of international convention laws in history to shelter people. The embankment located just here, you have some memorial plate in front of almost each house, and the embankment just next to the Podzony Street has been named Carl Lutz in memory of his action. The last decision Carl Lutz took was to register these 8,000 people in 8 diplomatic collective passport with 1,000 name and 1,000 picture. This passport will eventually help the Jews if they eventually cross the borders. At the time he was negotiating with the Hungarian, a young man came to the American legation and asked to see Carl Lutz. This man was the 3rd secretary of the Swedish legation. Raoul Wallenberg came to Budapest in order to save 300 to 400 Jews who had linked with Sweden. But when he saw the desperate situation of the Jews, Raoul Wallenberg asked around him how he can do more. And each time he received the same answer: go and see Consul Lutz. So Carl Lutz was very impressed by this very energetic man, and he explained him everything about his restriction, the Schutzpass, the Schutzbrief, the safe house, and he even seconded a team of Halutzim to open the British legation immigration office. So Raoul Wallenberg merits its own presentation, but this brave man achieved to negotiate 32 safe houses with the Hungarian. Other diplomats helped Jews during the war in Budapest. We have Friedrich Born from the Red Cross, the Apostolic Nuns Angelo Rota, Giorgio Perlasca, and some other Portuguese diplomats. All of them have been named Righteous Among the Nation by Yad Vashem in Jerusalem. So during the August 1944, Carl Lutz heard that Regent Horthy secretly agreed with the German to start again the deportation. This was supposed to happen on August 25th, but a miracle occurred on the 23rd of August. As you see, Romania decided to join the Allies, and from that day, the Russians started to invade Hungary. So, starting September 1944, Regent Horthy, fearing that Germany will lose the war, started negotiation with the Russians. But it took so long that Germany heard about his project, and on October 15th, 1944, 2 hours later, after Regent Horthy announced that he has joined the Allies, the German put the Arrow Cross in charge of the government. The Arrow Cross was an extreme national party with thousands of extremists who prefer mass murdering Jews, often along the Danube, rather than fighting the Russian. Within less than 3 months, they killed more than 38,000 Jews. So in front of this desperate situation, Carl Lutz opened the doors of the glass house, and the number of sheltered people jumped from 800 to 3,000 to 4,000 people. And he ordered the Halutzim to edit 100,000 letters of protection. One day, Carl Lutz, you remember this image, Carl Lutz was at his balcony when he heard some gunshot coming from the Danube. So he rushed with his chauffeur to the Danube, and what he saw was unspeakable. The Arrow Cross was perpetrating mass murder of Jews in the Danube. The blue Danube had become the red Danube. So Carl Lutz stepped down from his car, and he handed plenty of letters of protection to the remaining Jews who had not as yet been executed. He heard a woman calling him from the water. She was wounded and she was drawing, and she called Herr Consul, Herr Consul. And so Carl Lutz went into the water, grabbed the woman, put her in his car, and told her that from this moment she would be under Swiss protection, and this woman will survive. And at the exact place where this woman was rescued is standing now the famous Shoes Memorial, where the Carl Lutz Society, as already mentioned, displayed its exhibition in September 2022. But the nightmare of the Jews were not finished, because in October 1944, with the tacit agreement of the German, the Arrow Cross obliged all the Jews to gather into the Great Ghetto, and that includes all the Jews in the excess number of the authorized quota who were standing in the safe house. No doubt that the project was to bomb the ghetto at a later stage. Moreover, the Arrow Cross and the German organized a death march of 40,000 people from Budapest to Vienna in order to concentrate the defense of Vienna. And each single day, Raoul Wallenberg and Carl Lutz team went through this long queue of marchers and handed some letters of protection. Some days, but not every day, no Jews were able to cross the border because they all received some letter of protection. So in December 24, Carl Lutz appointed two men to represent him in Pest, Peter Zürcher and Ernst von Rust. And those two people were involved in preventing the Great Ghetto to be bombed. We have to name here another guy, Harold Feller, who helped Carl Lutz in his rescue operation, not only by hiding Jews, but hiding as well the whole Swedish legation staff, because their building has been bombed by the Arrow Cross. During Christmas 19, they all have been named right to some of the nation by Jan Wettstein. And finally, on December 24th, all the bridge between Pest and Buda were bombed by the German in order to protect Pest, Buda, sorry. And Carl Lutz was confined with 30 other people in the cellar of the British legation. So finally, in January 15th, 1945, Pest was liberated, and on February 13th, 1945, Buda was liberated. And afterwards, all the diplomats were expelled from Hungary, and Carl Lutz came back in April in Switzerland. And the only words he heard from the Swiss administration when he crossed the border was, "Do you have anything to declare?" And the Swiss administration ordered an investigation of the action of the Swiss legation in Budapest, but the judge, who fully understood the situation, completely exonerated the whole staff, including Carl Lutz, and condemned the Swiss authority for having ordered such an investigation. So Carl Lutz, without being sanctioned by his administration, was very affected by the behavior of his senior, and went into depression for several months. He continued serving for 10 years in the Swiss administration. Then he was appointed again consul in Bregenz in Austria, and he was then promoted general consul in 1960. places which were very important for Carl Lutz. The first one is when the laws of life are stronger than the text of laws. And the second one is when so many countries break the laws to kill, there might be one who break them to save people. Thank you very much for your attention. And now I would like to introduce Agnès Hirschi. You already met during the presentation. And I would like to give the floor to Agnès so she can testify maybe on how she met Carl Lutz the first time. Agnès, can you hear us? Can you unmute yourself, Agnès?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Agnès. We hear you. Welcome, Agnès. Always a pleasure to have you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor and privilege for me to be with you today and to speak to you from Switzerland. I do this with great pleasure because as a young man, Carl Lutz spent 20 years in the United States, 20 years which proved very important in his life and in fact impacted his future diplomatic career. It was in spring 1944 that I met Carl Lutz for the first time in Budapest. I was a little girl, aged 6, you saw me. I accompanied my mother to the Swiss Legation. She went to see Vice Consul Lutz to seek Swiss protection for me. My parents were Hungarian and Jewish, but I happened to be born in London, so I was a British subject and in danger of deportation as a citizen of an enemy country. I remember very well this first contact with Carl Lutz. He was sitting behind a very big desk. He was quite a tall man, serious looking in a serious suit. But I remember the way he smiled at me and at my mother. He took time to listen to us. He seemed attracted by my mother. And after a second meeting, they offered her a job as a housekeeper at his residence in Buda. This meant that we were safe. And so we stayed with the Lutz family until the end of the war. But in November 1944, saw the start of the siege of Buda. The siege was more than terrible. It was terrifying. There was bombing all day and night. A few weeks later, after Christmas 1944, we had to move permanently to the bomb shelter of the residence of Carl Lutz. There were 30 of us, and that's where we spent the next 2 months until the end of the war. It was in that bomb shelter on January 3rd, 1945, that I celebrated my 7th birthday. A birthday I can remember to this day. A birthday I will never forget, because on one day the house was hit by 20 fire bombs. The building caught fire and burned for 48 hours while we took shelter down in the cellar. It was cold and we had little food. And we were afraid that the fuel tank in the courtyard filled with 3,000 liters of gas could also be hit and explode at any time. By a miracle, the cellar survived the attack and we survived too. But during the bombing, armed men, arrow-cross people forced their way into the building and stole our belongings, our furniture, clothing, pictures, even automobiles. Somehow we managed to survive, as most of the people who were under Swiss protection. So Carl Lutz saved also the life of my mother and of myself. But even now, I cannot forget those long, dark, desperate days. There were days of great danger. Carl and my mother were married in Budapest in fall 1949, and we left Hungary to settle in Switzerland. I was 11 years old at that time. And to be honest, I was not so happy leaving my home, my homeland, my friends, and my beloved Budapest. But very soon, and helped by the kindness of Carl, who became a wonderful father to me, I got accustomed to my new life here in Switzerland, where I have lived ever since. Let me, just to finish, say something about the personality and the motivation of Carl Lutz. Why did he risk his own life, his career, and even his health to rescue Jewish people? It was because he embraced a very simple philosophy, namely, as already Frederic had mentioned, the laws of life are stronger than man-made regulations. That's the way my father thought, and that's how he acted. He was not born a hero. In fact, he was rather shy and introverted, a silent man and a bureaucrat. And in Budapest, he was not sent to Budapest to rescue Jews. But as a committed Christian, he could not tolerate the Jews being pursued, persecuted, and killed. And it was also mainly his religion and the example of his beloved mother, who was a very strong personality and a deeply religious woman, who made him act as he did. When he saw the suffering of the Jews, he felt that God had given him this noble task, and that he was confident that God would also give him the strength to fulfill it. Thank you for your attention. Now I would like to introduce Professor Charles Gati, my dear friend whom I have already met in Washington, D.C. a few years ago. He will deposit his testimony. Thank you.
I don't know if you can see me now. I can't see anybody.
Yes, Charles,
maybe.
we hear you. And we see you.
You see me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, well, thank you, Agnès, my good friend. And thank you, Frederic, for keeping the memory of Carl Lutz alive. I was a 10-year-old Jewish boy in Budapest in 1944. That is, I was still 9, but I turned 10 that year. And my story has a short version, and then it has a longer version. The short version is that in the fall of 1944, I was allowed with my parents to go to a so-called protected house in the international ghetto near the Danube, an area that has been mentioned and described. We were there just a few weeks. When how we got the passport, I have no idea. My dad did. I was one of the lucky ones who had my mom with me all the time, and my father almost all the time. Then the interesting part of this short story is that at the very beginning of December 1944, my father, I wish I had asked him how he knew this, but my father decided that it was not safe to remain in the Swiss protected house in the international ghetto. He managed to hire a Hungarian policeman, and that policeman took the three of us, my dad, my mom, and myself, from the international ghetto along the Danube to downtown Budapest, where the great ghetto was. I vividly remember that trip, maybe less than 2 miles, because that was a trip where I was instructed by my dad what we were doing. And what we were doing was that the policeman would tell a Nazi, German or Hungarian, on the way to the Budapest ghetto, if we were to stop, that we had been caught escaping from the Budapest ghetto, and he was taking us back there. Luckily, we were not stopped, and we got in there, and we spent the last few weeks, about a month, in the ghetto until the Red Army, the Soviet Army, liberated the ghetto, as somebody mentioned, on the 16th of January, just a few years ago. I say that jokingly. That's the short story. The longer story is that the problem started already in the early summer, when the house where we lived was declared a Jewish house. It had a yellow star. We stayed there for a while, and then we went to another house when we had to go there, when there were about maybe 15 members of my family still alive at that time, in a 2-room apartment. It was from there that in the fall we had to move to this Swiss house along the Danube, and then from there to the Budapest ghetto. What is I want to conclude with 2 points. One is that my dad's wisdom, which I don't know the details, I don't know how he knew that, but when he decided to hire that Hungarian policeman to go from the international ghetto to the regular ghetto, it so happens that after that, soon after that, in December of 1944, the Swiss protected house was emptied by the Nazis, and they were let down maybe a block or a block and a half from the house to the Danube and killed. And so therefore, I owe also my dad the wisdom to move from one place to another. But let me just conclude this very brief summary of a much, much longer story by saying my admiration for Carl Lutz. It's not only what he did. That obviously is the main story. What a hero, what a gentleman, what a great guy he was. But that since I also worked in the State Department, I have some idea about the order that one ought to have, that he was able to defy his Swiss superiors, who were bureaucrats, who couldn't think about the human tragedy underway at that time. And not only did he do what Frederic so comprehensively described, but he became the tutor, the mentor for Wallenberg, about whom most people know more than about Carl Lutz, but Lutz is the one who started this. And what a great guy he was, and I remain forever in his debt. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles. Thank you. And so we're going to hear now one of the 3 brothers of the Lindenblatt family. Yehuda, the floor is yours.
Yes. That is George. That is my father, Yehuda Lindenblatt. have more of us, but that's my mother. Piroshka, that's me, a cute guy. That's almost 80 years ago. I was 7 years old that time. That's my two brothers, George, who's here, and Robert. George, the second one. And it's my father, me, my mother. She was a beautiful, smart woman. And that was my father who cared for us. And this is Robert. He's a little bit angry because I don't know. But he was a cute guy. That's Dr. Sarsonyi. This is George. This is Robert with a nanny we had. And soon will come my mother up. That's me with a yellow star. 7 years old with my mother, had to wear the yellow star. First, I would like to thank you, the Jewish Heritage Museum. So let me talk and let my brothers talk. Then I thank you for Frederic also to invite us. And Agnès and Professor Gati, I'm very happy to see him again. Last time I saw him in Washington. So anyway, we were living in Budapest in a Jewish house. So all the houses was Jewish. They had a yellow star on it. And that was marked the Jews live. We happened to have a man who was on an Aerocross, the Aerocross party, who the fascist party wanted on our apartment. Our apartment was in a quiet side of the street. He wanted it. So he's one day came in and take to my mother and my cousin, you have to go to the next to the river where they killed a lot of Jews. Next to the river is a clubhouse for the Aerocross. You have to go there. So we went. The two of us, my cousin and my mother. When we get to that point, get to this party house, you know, this party house is one thing, like a Roach Motel. You go in, you never come out. So my mother said, stay outside. He went in. I saw my mother fly out. Let's go. Grabbed us and we run. How far you can run with a 3 years old, 5 years old, 7 years old. One Nazi was running after us. Stop, stop, stop. We stopped at one point. And the guy said, you cannot go. If you come here, you cannot go away. Why you come? And mother, a smart one, took out a photocopy of the Swiss Schutzpass. Give it to the guy. The guy look at the paper, look at us, take the paper apart and curse in Hungarian. I don't want to say it. Curse in Hungarian. Get out of here. So we went back to our house. And our Nazi, the guy who wanted an apartment, he said to us, why you come back? My mother didn't say a word. And he said, don't worry. Tomorrow morning, we'll get a truck and get you away from here. So meantime, my mother got a word to my father, and my father came. And the guy said, it was a winter night, cold. He had a stove in the middle of his apartment. So my father went there and he said to the guy, please, leave my family alone. The Russians are here. This will be over too. The guy said no. My father had a belt. In the belt was some money. He took out the money and put it on the table. He says, this is yours. I will never ask back. Just leave them alone. The guy said, the Jews goes tomorrow morning. So at 5 o'clock, my father, he was a businessman in the area before, get a guy with a pushcart. And with a pushcart, we went to WWII. This is where was the glass house. And then we waited outside. My grandfather, who shaved off his beard, looked like a Hungarian. He was a very religious man. He was some of the organizer there, get us in. And I would give to the rest of the story, because I can talk till doomsday, and to my brother George, he can continue.
Yehuda. Thank you, Yehuda. George?
Yeah, that's me. How are you? I have very few, but very, very, very vivid memories. And one of the most one I remember, when we went to the glass house, my mother was outside, and finally we were able to get into the glass house. And in the glass house, we were lying on a bed, which was full of fiber. And I had a heavy winter coat on me, and all that fiber went through it, and I got sore itches all over. But we couldn't stay there too long. And after, I don't know, a month or maybe less, we had to leave because no children were allowed to stay in that particular building called the glass house. So we got into I remember as of yesterday, we got into a car, sort of, an ambulance, whereby we had also the Benedict family. The Benedict was a friend of ours who had 2 little girls with him. We went over to the orphanage house, which was actually the Red Cross house, and was also owned by the Englander family, who were bakers. And we stayed there for a while. I found out later we couldn't stay much longer because my mother had no more money. So one day my mother decided to have to go to see my grandmother, who was in the house protected by Carl Lutz. So we get together in Budapest, walk out of the building. My mother took my stitches and put them in her pocket. My brother and me took the yellow stuff off from our coat and put them in my pocket. And we walked pretty far for a long time to get to my grandmother. On the way, my brother started to scream. He said, Mommy, don't go that way. Don't go that way. I don't want to go see Grandma. I don't want to go to Grandma. My mother sort of hit the little kid, said, we have to go to Grandma. I have to go to Grandma. But we didn't, because my brother saw that anybody went in that direction, didn't come back. So make the long story short, finally, we got to my grandmother's building, which was a Jewish style building and protected by the Swiss consulate. And we were staying there till the Soviet army came in 1945. And now I give to my brother, Robert.
Hello, Robert.
We have lots of stories to tell, endless stories, but I would like to tell you one individual story which was able to done by because of Carl Lutz. We started out in a glass house back in the days when they find out that about a brigade of Hungarian Jews will be taken away to Auschwitz. My grandfather, who was a rabbi, who cut off his beard and dressed like a real Hungarian, this was working on the underground, and he found out about this group to be taken to Auschwitz. But no way they could save the whole brigade. They were only able to save maybe 1 or 2 persons. So what happened is that in the glass house, they prepared a plan. The plan was to try to save a person. The person happened to be luckily my father. They went to this camp, which is over 1,000 Hungarian young men were ready to be taken away. They came in with false papers, handed over to the paper that we want to take out Mr. Lindenblatt. You can see this in movies, Hollywood movies, but not in real life. But it is in real life. 2 Jewish boys dressed up in an Aerocross uniform with guns on their shoulder, with false paper demanding that to take out from the group Mr. Lindenblatt. Mr. Lindenblatt, they found him. Mr. Lindenblatt was taken out. But as he was taken out, he really almost pissed into his pants. Why are they taking me out? I out of the 1,000. Why? Because they want to kill me. They're happy on the way to the glass house that they ended up. They told them, "We are Jewish boys, we just saved you." And thank God, my father survived. He was liberated in the glass house with all the other heroes. And it was caused by and the help of Carl Lutz, who was really a hero, which is no word can tell how great he was. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to tell you the stories. But if you need more, we have literally hundreds and hundreds of little episodes. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Frederic, for your wonderful presentation. And all of the people, panelists, for being with us. Well, since we're a little bit over time, and we really appreciate everyone for staying on and being with us, we do want to get to a few questions. So let's start with this question, and Frederic, you may know more about this, but I'm sure others can help here too. How is Carl Lutz remembered today in Budapest, specifically, and Hungary generally, statues, conferences, etc.? I know that's the work you're doing with the Carl Lutz Society. And then why do you feel the Carl Lutz story is not better known?
Okay, so I can reply to the first part, and if Agnès would like to complete just after, maybe for the second part, she would be more than welcome. So Hungary and Carl Lutz. Carl Lutz has a lot of plates. He has several memorials. One main one just behind the Great Synagogue in Budapest. One of the main embankments has been named under Carl Lutz, and which is much bigger than and much more well known in Budapest than his in Switzerland. In Switzerland, he's just have a small pass behind the city of Bern, and in Budapest, he's in the center of the city. Secondly, he has a lot of plates. We have to say that the American mission always paid tribute to Carl Lutz. And for example, we all have been invited, including Agnès, when we did the inauguration of our exhibition in Budapest in September 2022 by the new American ambassador to celebrate Carl Lutz. And the city of Budapest allowed us to display this exhibition along the Shoes Memorial, and as far as I know, it's the only exhibition who had been allowed to be displayed just next to the Shoe Memorial. So I think Hungary is doing good in memory of Carl Lutz. Maybe, of course, Agnès can complement and give her view of how Hungary honor Carl Lutz. Agnès? You have to unmute yourself, Agnès. Yes.
Carl Lutz is much better known in Hungary than in Switzerland, I must say. I have been, since my retirement 20 years ago, I'm really doing a lot in this respect. I had promised my father to promote his action, to get young people interested in the whole thing and not to forget these terrible times. And I did a lot in these 20 years, but the result in Switzerland, he's better known than he has been before, yes. But it's very hard. In Switzerland, they don't celebrate their heroes. They have no tradition of that. Besides Wilhelm Tell, there are not many Swiss heroes. And that makes the things very hard. But we have a street in Bern, a small street in Bern, and I managed that his grave is in a cemetery where all the prominent people are buried. But that all this had to be done. They wouldn't do it just by themselves. They didn't have the idea. And then, of course, there were wonderful things happened in the last years. In the National Assembly, and they had a big celebration of Carl Lutz, and they celebrated him with standing ovations 3 years ago. And in the federal building, the largest gathering room is called Consul Carl Lutz now. There are some results, but I must say, generally, there are still a lot of Swiss who don't know him. And on the other hand, in Hungary and even in the United States, I meet people who know about him. It's hard, as Frederic knows.
Yes, Agnes, you're right. But I think Switzerland now, after, Switzerland had always had problem with his history, and we are not going to spend times here. But since several years, as Agnes mentioned, Switzerland tried to do better than before, and we have a lot of support from a certain person inside the administration, and Ambassador Baeriswyl is maybe the best example of that, because she's always supporting. And I have to say that the Swiss embassies around the world are always supporting every event we are organizing. And even in Switzerland, when we contact cities like Geneva, we displayed in the equivalent of the Carl Lutz embankment in Budapest, in the Mont Blanc, Quai du Mont Blanc, we displayed the exhibition. So things are moving lately, as everything in Switzerland, we have to say, but it's moving slowly. But I think we'll get there in some time.
Of course.
What was the second question?
The end of when Carl Lutz came back to Switzerland after the war, the situation was very difficult. It was the Cold War. The role of Switzerland was very suspicious. They didn't want to speak about what happened during World War II. There were no documents available yet, and that was also a reason that they had no idea what he happened in Budapest and what he went through. They didn't even wanted to listen to him, and that he was very frustrated.
Yes.
We had, I think the question is, Carl Lutz, how many people did he save? I know in the tens of thousands, is that correct?
Yeah, it's in fact, the numbers varies according to the historian. It's very difficult to gather strict numbers because it was a kind of chaos at the end of the war, and we always talk about tens of thousands, some documents mentioned some numbers, and I saw that there was a question if there is any book regarding Carl Lutz, and the best book is Dangerous Diplomacy, written by Theo Chui, which is for me the best story of Carl Lutz that have ever been written.
Frederic, while I wrap up, maybe you can write the name in the chat so people can look it up.
Yeah,
And,
of course.
I just want to thank everyone for staying on longer than normal, and we so appreciate you being with us for A Sanctuary in the Storm, Carl Lutz and the Rescue of Budapest Jews, co-presented with the Carl Lutz Society. If you enjoyed